It is truly no joke how embedded misogyny is into our culture, because tell me why I was today years old when I found out that Helena of Sparta, the one whose beauty started the Trojan War, actually had nothing to do with starting said war. And in fact, I will go as far as saying that she is one of the only innocent characters in the whole story. But still, she's the one that is blamed for it. And why? Because she's a woman. Welcome back, my coaches, viewers, and readers. I hope your weekend was filled with cute picnic dates and shiny metallic armors. And today we are talking about two of the most important pieces of literature in the West, which are the Iliad and the Odyssey. And after reading both, I finally understand why they are so important. And let me tell you why. Let's start. Starting with bringing a little bit more context to the conversation. For those who don't know, both the Iliad and the Odyssey happened during small parts of time in a bigger conflict called the Trojan War, which I would consider the most iconic conflict in literature, or at least in Western literature. But I would say we first need to understand why the Trojan War was so important and how it actually began, because I would say this is not a context that we receive in the Iliad nor in the Odyssey. So let me just do a quick recap of what the Trojan War is, as much research as I've done, and then we can get into the Iliad and the Odyssey later. Like every other mess in Greek mythology, it always starts with Zeus. He is the father of gods, and he falls in love with one of the goddesses of the sea, Thetis, after seeing her just swimming around the ocean. But unlike any of his conquests, or I would rather say victims, Thetis is untouchable because there are two prophecies that are dooming them both. On Zeus' side, his prophecy is that he will be overthrown by his son, whereas for Thetis, her prophecy is that she will bear a son greater than his father, meaning that if both Zeus and Thetis have a child together, this child will overthrow Zeus. And obviously Zeus doesn't want to be overthrown like his father Kronos, so Zeus decides to marry Thetis off to a human, to a mortal, who is called Peleus, and at their wedding all gods are invited. So obviously Zeus, the whole Olympians, some Titans as well, but one goddess is not invited, who is Ares, the goddess of discord. And obviously after finding out that she is not invited, she is enraged and decides to create discord actually. So what she does is that she gets a golden apple, which is one of the most desired fruits for the Olympians, and decides to send it to the wedding as a wedding gift to the fairest, and that's what it's written in the golden apple. And obviously many of the goddesses, after seeing this golden apple, this very desirable object, and with the insignia to the fairest, they all decide that this apple is for them, and that's a present for them from Ares. The goddesses that claim this apple are Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, and because they are just bickering and fighting over who owns this apple, they decide to ask someone else to make the decision for them, and they decide that Zeus would be the best contender, but obviously Zeus doesn't want to get in trouble and decides that someone else will be making the decision. And Zeus picks Paris, who is the prince of Troy but actually grows up as just a normal shepherd, and he has seen through his visions and through his all his observations of the earth. He has seen that Paris is actually the best option for this decision, right? Because he is the one that actually makes these fair decisions and is actually fair in all his games, for example. So all the goddesses go down the earth and they decide to make the decision just right there, right? And because Paris doesn't want to offend any of the goddesses, he's constantly mentioning that he doesn't really want to decide, but obviously the goddesses don't play fair and they try to bribe him, but only one is actually successful, who is Aphrodite. And Aphrodite successfully bribes Paris with the love of the fairest woman. And guess who is the fairest mortal human being in Earth? Helen of Sparta. But there is a slight problem here, and it is that Helen is actually married to Menelaus, who is the king of Sparta. But obviously Aphrodite doesn't seem to care, Paris doesn't seem to care either, and they both organize Helen's abduction, which is done successfully. And after finding out that Helen has been abducted, and actually Aphrodite makes Cupid, the god of love, or the god of enamorment, he makes Ellen fall in love with Paris. So even though she is abducted, she is also made to fall in love with Paris. So she decides to live with him as well. So after Menelaus finding that Helen has been abducted and also she is now married to Paris, he goes into rage because that's his wife, that's his queen of Sparta, and decides and swears vengeance on Paris and therefore on Troy, and then the war starts. Now this is where it gets complex because there are so many fucking names in this drama, right? But mainly we have two sides. We have the sides of the Greeks and the sides of the Trojans. For the Greek side, we have Menelaus, obviously, Agamemnon, we have Odysseus, Achilles, Patroclus, and Ajax. And then for the Trojans, we mainly have three names, which are Paris, Hector, and King Priam. There are so many names in each side, but yeah, I just want to focus on the basics, on the most important names, right? And then focusing on the Iliad, actually the Iliad, even though this is gargantuan, actually the Iliad is only a few days just at the start, at the end of the Trojan War after 9 years, right? And we see how basically the things that we see in the Iliad are mainly the strategies that both sides take in order to take on the other side. For example, for the Greeks, in order to take on Troy, and then for the Trojans, just to defend Troy and defend their home. I will also say that one of the most important things that we see in the Iliad has to be the role of all the deities, so all the Olympians into the battle, because we see a lot of strategies, a lot of different benefactors, I will call them, a lot of different gods that are trying to make one of each sides win over the other, even though it is forbidden for them to actually do, but they still do because they are trying to protect either heroes or they are trying to protect their egos. And then finally we have the Odyssey, and I would say this book is actually quite different to the Iliad, because even though we do see battle, I would say the Odyssey focuses on Odysseus' journey back to Ithaca, which is his home, who he is king of, right? And I would say we also see the role of fate and the role of the Olympians in his journey, but I would say the Odyssey focuses on how smart and what strategies Odysseus actually took in order to evade fate and to evade the rage of the gods. Now, after reading both books, there are two things that are crystal clear to me and that both of them have in common. And the first one is that both humans and gods are obsessed with ego, with power, with being like, with this sense of grandeur and this sense of heroicism, right? They have these like their own, how they say, their own pressure to perform these heroicities and to become the best in battle, and to have this like this desire to be loved and to be validated by other men and by society in general. Because even though it is true that the vast majority of the characters that we see are actually either kings or princes or people that are heavily like influential, there's still this pressure to perform in battle and to be like one of these very heavily remembered heroes, right? Like Heracles, for example, Achilles. It is mentioned multiple times that Achilles, Patroclus, Ajax, and all these Greek characters dream to become a figure like Heracles, right? That is very like that's something that is mentioned in the Iliad constantly. And then another thing that I would say that is very crystal clear to me is the fact that both human and heroes can never escape fate. They are always bound by what fate says for them, or what fate creates, what the path that fate creates for them. Like it's just untouchable. It doesn't matter what you try to do, or it doesn't matter how many strategies you try to just move along the way, you will always be stuck with fate. I would say this is especially important for mortals, right? For both Greeks and Trojans, because I would say all these mortals are treated as pawns used to fulfill like any desires or any twisted brawls and battles that the gods have between them or amongst them. And it always ends up with devastating repercussions, but the gods don't seem to care about that. They actually care about getting the results, right? So I have a list here of all the cases or all the gods that actually were influential in the Trojan War, in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, and why did they support it, or why do I think these deities supported each heroes, and what's the point, right? So I see, for example, that Hera and Athena actually supported the Greeks because Paris, who is on the Trojan side, didn't choose them for the golden apple, or to be the owner of the golden apple, therefore being the fairest. And it's so clear to me that this is actually why. I would say with Athena, maybe not that much, because Athena has always been a very strong supporter of the Greeks, just culturally, and also because the Greeks have Athens, which is the city of Athena. But there's still a lot of influence on Athena's support, mainly because she hates Paris, right? Then another god is Poseidon, and he actually supports the Greeks because Hector's grandfather cheated him out of payment for building Troy's walls, right? Like that's something that Hector's grandfather actually did, not Hector, but he supports the Greeks because of that, right? Then Aphrodite supports Troy because Paris chose her or gave her the apple, and then Ares obviously supports the Trojans because Aphrodite does, and obviously because Athena supports the Greeks, and both Athena and Ares do not get along, right? And I would say all these divine rivalries actually manipulate humans into doing these actions, right? Or and they do it with empty promises of glory, with honor, or with love. That's what we see in the golden apple discussion. That's exactly what Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite promised Paris, right? Each one of them promised him either glory, honor, or love. But behind all these promises, behind all these rivalries, there is one thing that sticks with me, and this thing is pride. Like, if we actually think about it and deepen it, right, all the decisions that the Olympians make and all the support that they give to each hero, it is based on either fear of losing things, or either because of pride and because of rage, right? And shame for not being chosen. So for example, we have Zeus marrying Thetis off because he doesn't want to be overthrown, right? He doesn't want to stop being the king of the Olympians and the ruler of all the gods, right? Because if he marries Thetis, or if he has a child with Thetis, this child will overthrow him. So obviously he doesn't want that. So because of his pride and because he still wants to be the ruler of the Olympians, he decides to marry just to marry Thetis off, right? And then we also have Ares, for example, who she is so enraged and so embarrassed that she hasn't been invited to Thetis' wedding, that she decides to just bring a present that she knows will create discord, and then just sends it to the wedding because she just wants chaos. And the fact that it actually worked, because it just shows how prideful these Olympians are, right? For example, Hera and Hera and Athena are so upset about the fact that Paris did not pick them, that they actually decide to support the Greeks just all the way till the end, because they are upset at Paris because he didn't pick them, because their pride was hurt, and therefore they are enraged that they had to lose to Aphrodite, right? Like on Hera's side, the fact, I would say that she is even more upset because she is technically the queen, right? She is the queen of the Olympians, and the fact that she has lost to the goddess of love, someone who she constantly views as less, or as a lesser goddess than her, that enrages her. So therefore she supports the Greeks, right? Then for Athena, for example, it's even worse, because even though she is not the queen of the Olympians, right, she is the favorite of Zeus, and also she is the one that is considered one of the top goddesses or one of the top deities for Greek mythology, right? Because she's the strategist for war. She is one of the most central key goddesses for ancient Greece in general. So the fact that she wasn't picked, and that she was picked, that Aphrodite was picked over her, that enraged her. And obviously we also have to take into account Menelaus, right, who is the king of Sparta. I would say he is the one that actually starts the conflict, or that he is the catalyst, because his wife was abducted by Paris. But the thing here, the key stuff here, is that as the way wives were viewed in ancient Greece are completely different to how we see spouses now, right? Because in ancient Greece, or up until very recently, wives were considered objects, and they were considered property, right? So the fact that some things Menelaus's property was stolen from him, that is what made him enraged. And also we need to take into account that Helena of Sparta, in order for Menelaus to get Helena of Sparta, he had to fight tooth and nail, right? We're talking about heroes like Odysseus wanted her as well, right? So the fact that he, after fighting for many, many years, he managed to get Helena of Sparta, but then someone else comes in here and just snatches her, that enraged him, and that hurt his pride. So therefore he decided to go to war for 10 years in order to try to get Helen back, but then never got her back. He doesn't care about the war. He cares about the fact that someone else has his possession, which is pride on the best example ever. And same thing with the Odyssey, right? After 10 years of fighting in Troy, Odysseus decides to go back after Troy is won over and the war finishes, and then he just decides to pack his things and leave to Ithaca, which is his own land, and which is who he is the king of, right? So he decides to go back to Ithaca, but in one of the islands that he stops during his journey to just like get some food and some water and some stuff, he accidentally kills one of the sons of Poseidon, who is a cyclops. And Poseidon is so enraged about the fact that Odysseus has accidentally killed the cyclops that he decides to curse his journey for 10 years. It takes him 10 years to get to Ithaca, right? And like, I would say this is also a very good example of pride, because even though we see, or at least as far as I know, Poseidon is not a good father. He's not a good partner either. And I would say he is very regular when it comes to emotions of love, right? Like, he views people as possessions and things that are related to him rather than people that are like relatives, right? Same thing with his children and his partners. So in this sense, the fact that Odysseus kills one of his properties, that enrages him, and that shows him that Odysseus is more powerful than he expected, right? So like, the fact that Poseidon actually supported Odysseus, or supported the Greeks during the Trojan War, and then he just turns his back to Odysseus because of this. It's the best proof, or like it's the biggest proof of the Olympians just being driven by pride. We also need to take into account one of the most important characters in the Odyssey, which is Telemachus, who is Odysseus' son, right? The vast majority of the decisions that he makes, even though they are made with good intentions, because he cares about his dad and he cares about his mom as well, and like everything that his dad or his parents have built so far in Ithaca, he also has this sort of pride, right? He is the son of Odysseus. He's the son of this hero, right? So he has something to prove. So therefore, he also is the one that travels around. He is the one that tries to defend Ithaca, who tries to defend his mother with all these like lame ass contenders that she has. But he does it, or I would say the main reason why he does it is because he has something to prove to Odysseus and to prove to the gods. So therefore, he makes all these decisions, and he decides to be a man in order to prove that he is like, he's that bitch like Odysseus. As a quick conclusion, I would say that both the Iliad and the Odyssey are the perfect example of epic poetry and also historical fiction, because they represent the true nature of humanity, which is pride, rage, and vengeance. But more specifically for the Olympians, because they truly represent what the ancient Greeks cared the most about, right? Which was their pride, their connections, their influence, and their power. And also the way all of these needs and desires actually interconnect with their own flaws, right? So for example, Zeus forcing a marriage on Thetis, for example, or Eris's revenge on all the gods and not being invited to the wedding, or Aphrodite offering a mortal woman to Paris in order to, like, as a bribe, right? For example, and in this last example with Helen, this is why I say that it upsets me so much how Helen is always being treated as the starter of the war, or like the catalyst of the Trojan War, because Helen actually had nothing to do with the war, right? And she is actually viewed as a victim, or I at least view her as a victim, because not only she was raptured, or not only she was kidnapped from her own home, from her own land, who she was queen of, right? But also at the same time, she is being forced to fall in love with Paris, and also she is forced to see her family, to see her people die, to protect her and to get her back. History doesn't really care about that. They only view her as someone whose beauty started a war or started a conflict. She will always be painted as the villain, as this seductress that actually got Paris and then just created this 9-year, 10-year conflict. But just like many other innocent women, she will always be treated as the villain, even though she was the victim. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have read the Iliad or the Odyssey, I would love to hear from you guys, because honestly, these books were not easy to read. They were very intense, sometimes way too explicit. Obviously, I am not a historian, so I might not understand how important those like specific texts or those specific lines are for us to learn history. But yes, sometimes the books were a little bit too intense and a little bit too long, I'm not gonna lie, but I genuinely enjoyed them. I thought they were great, and I am glad that I read them. And if you have read the Iliad or the Odyssey or both, I would love to know your opinion about them, or I would love to know what do you think about Helen being treated as the villain. And as always, again, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to see more of my content, please make sure that you follow me on my social media. I also have Substack now, where I'm just literally posting random stuff. So yeah, you can also follow me on there as well. And yeah, I will see you next week. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.